right. Hello, everyone. You may not be expecting a video, but my name is Rob Catalano, and I wanted to get us kicked off here for the webinar. So I appreciate everyone for joining the Trends in Diversity and Inclusion webinar brought to you by the WorkTango series. You notice I'm in my home right now in a very snowy and blizzardly Toronto. I think I saw a comment come in that said, I'm joining from Toronto where I was just outside making snow angels in the blizzard. So I totally hear you. I'm very warm with my tea and my letter to remember my name, Rob, and just super excited to be hosting this webinar for everyone here today. So, what I want to do is just first by introduction, if no one knows me, my name is Rob Catalano. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer at WorkTango. That picture is a much younger, a less gray-haired, and a less hairier version of what you see there. If anyone on here has not heard of WorkTango, we're an organization and a company that helps other companies hear the voice of their employees, but in real time provide those insights to HR, to executives, or even all the leaders in an organization. So if you think of things like engagement surveys or getting feedback on major change management, or specific to the topic today, hearing the voice of employees on their sentiment around inclusion, that's really what we help companies do. But I know you didn't come here to see me. I know you came here to see Sasha. So I did want to introduce Sasha the Clerk. A couple of things about Sasha. She's the head of diversity and inclusion at Norton Rose Fulbright. And if you haven't heard of that company, it's a large global organization, law firm with I think over 10,000 employees. And just a couple of things about Sasha. First thing is before moving to Canada in April 2000. Blizzard as well. She led her and herself and her team gets results. So the firm, Norton Rose Fulbright, recently has received a number of distinctions internationally in Canada, including being listed as a Stonewall Top 100 employer, the Times Top 100 Employers for Women, one of Canada's top diversity employers, and most recently, the firm has achieved a gold gender parity certification from La Gouvernance Féminine. And I'm in Canada, and my French isn't that good, so hopefully that was pretty decent. Without reading a whole full bio about her, the one kind of something fun that I learned about Sasha as we talked about creating this webinar that you wouldn't know about her just reading a bio is she's big on photography. I've even seen websites of her work, and she's passionate about it. And from outside looking in, she's a very, very good photographer in seeing some of her work. So that all being said, before just introducing and giving you and handing you over to Sasha, what I wanted to do is just share a quick context on my hand. So I saw this image a couple of years back, and it actually is from PwC in Singapore, but it really shared my sentiment around the concept of diversity being a mix and inclusion really respecting the difference in all of it. And the reason why we're really passionate about this topic is, I had mentioned earlier, WorkTango helps hear the voice of employees for many different reasons, but for the last couple of years, the concept of understanding not just diversity, but sentiment around inclusion in organizations is the fastest growing thing that we're starting to see. And a lot of what's being discussed in our WorkTango community. So, as this is becoming more part of our work lives and our day lives, it just felt fitting to start bringing on someone who's been doing this for so long, really passionate about the space to talk about this and give you insights on new trends and in this changing workplace. So that all being said, enough from me. I want to introduce you to Sacha de Klerk. So Sasha, I'll let you take it over from here.
Thank you so much, Rob, and thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm hoping that I can just get control of the slides there, and I hope that that's worked now. So I'm very pleased to be speaking to you all today about one of my favorite topics, diversity and inclusion. And the focus today is really to talk about the landscape of diversity and inclusion management and how it has changed. We're going to talk about some of the things that have changed and the trends and innovations within diversity and inclusion management, but also we're going to talk a little bit about what hasn't changed and what still holds true and presents an opportunity for us to try fresh approaches. But before we dive into things, I want you to reflect back on this question up on the slide. So what was your first exposure to organizational diversity? And it might have been recent, or it might have been many years ago. My first exposure was nearly 2 decades ago, and it was very different to how we approach diversity and inclusion now. It was a diversity workshop that was very much focused on discrimination and things that we shouldn't do and shouldn't say, because if we did those things, then our organization would end up in court, or even worse, the newspapers would publish a story about us. And it was very much positioned as something from a compliance perspective rather than as the opportunity we see it to be today. But as I was doing my research for this session, I read some back issues of the Harvard Business Review, and I went all the way back to 1996 actually, and there was an article about innovation in diversity and inclusion management that really piqued my interest. And I'll read to you the first paragraph of that article. It just said, "Why should companies concern themselves with diversity? Until recently, many managers answered this question with the assertion that discrimination is wrong, both legally and morally. But today, managers are voicing a second notion as well. A more diverse workforce, they say, will increase organizational effectiveness. It will lift morale, bring greater access to new segments of the marketplace, and enhance productivity. In short, they claim diversity will be good for business." And the article then goes on to talk about why initiatives don't work, and it recommends an approach to make diversity and inclusion management effective for organizational improvement. They say the secret is a cultural shift within organization and their leadership. Women and minorities should not be asked to blend in. They should not be doing work that's limited to working with a demographic that they represent. And they should be allowed to bring their diversity to the table to the benefit of all their colleagues in the organization. And as I read this, I thought to myself, well, isn't this the approach that we're still trying to implement 22 years later? So why have we not made the progress we want to make if the solution was already being talked about 2 decades ago? Now, diversity is enjoying a lot of time and profile, enjoying a lot of really high profile from leadership and many people within social and public context. There was a survey done by Deloitte in 2016, and it said that the proportion of executives who cited inclusion as a top priority has risen by 32% compared to when they did the survey in 2014. It also said that over 2/3 of executives rate diversity and inclusion as an important issue, and 38% of executives reported that the primary sponsor of the company's diversity and inclusion efforts is the CEO. But it's not just leaders that is paying attention, it's everyone else also. So employees, for example, are expressing stronger views on diversity and inclusion. So millennials, for example, they see inclusion as a mandatory part of corporate culture, defining how a company listens to them at work. And for younger workers, inclusion is not just about assembling diverse teams, it's also about connecting team members so that everyone is heard and respected. The general public is also paying attention, and we've witnessed the scrutiny of the general public on especially in the tech sector when it comes to gender and racial diversity. And finally, then also shareholders, customers, and suppliers are all taking a closer look at the issue. I know in the context of my own work, clients are increasingly asking us to provide data at our relationship review meetings, and they want the demographic breakdown of the people who are doing the work on their files. So they're holding us to account to walk the walk and not just talk the talk by talking about our fantastic policies and programs. The thing is that diversity isn't just about people. It's really evolving. It doesn't just impact people now. It impacts the brand and the corporate purpose and the performance of an organization. So despite this increased emphasis and scrutiny on diversity and inclusion, we still face a bit of a reality gap, and results appear to be too slow. CEOs are appointing chief diversity officers and then committees, but they're not really seeing the results that they want. And programs upon programs are implemented, but the results are small and incremental. The most popular solution today is also training, but while such interventions are helpful, it appears that that making people aware is just not enough. And worse still, change appears to be slowing down, so not accelerating. And sometimes it feels that we're going backward, with people starting to talk about things like diversity fatigue. Deloitte predict that parity won't be achieved until 2086, while the World Economic Forum predict that the pay gap won't close for another 217 years. So what is holding us back? Rob, I can't advance the slides again. There we go. So I made a little list of reasons why we are not making progress. And I made this list off the top of my head. And I came up with tons of reasons in 5 minutes. And I'm sure if we all got together, we could come up with even a few more. But these are just a few that I'd come up with. So the legacy of the stick approach. In the past, we took an approach of using the stick and not the carrot when we started to focus on diversity. We didn't focus on the benefits, and we started conversation with what's going to happen to our reputation and our brands and individuals if we don't recruit more people from diverse backgrounds. And often diversity training was coupled with sexual harassment training, so very much like my first experience with diversity. And my first experience of delivering diversity training was also, I had lots of case laws of organizations that had been taken to court for their transgressions. And for many people, this meant that they don't embrace diversity for its potential benefits. They just don't express their views out loud anymore because they're told that if they do, they might land in trouble. But they're not really changing any of their behaviors, and their views and assumptions essentially about people who are different to them haven't really changed. And there's something called institutional isomorphism, and a simple explanation for this is that it's the concept of common practice being mistaken for best practice. Unconscious bias is a great example of this. So many organizations offer unconscious bias training, but yet there's no data out there that suggests it has any positive impact at all on improving diversity or making organizational culture more inclusive. But many people speak of this training as a panacea. Diversity management often excludes the most influential demographic. And yes, I am talking about the white men. They are often the majority in the workplace. They are certainly the majority in leadership positions. They are the decision makers in organizations. But they're often left feeling like diversity is not about them. And without them on side, progress is really not going to accelerate. Diversity fatigue, so years and years of slow program, it wears people down. So when you implement initiative after initiative and the results are not there, your leadership and your champions, they're going to start to turn their attention to other things. And there's the myth of the meritocracy. This is one of my favorite ones. I love it when people say to me, we have a meritocratic culture, and if people work hard and they succeed, they will definitely rise to the top. But if this was true, gender parity would have been achieved already, and there wouldn't be hundreds of people around the world like myself doing this kind of work. And if it was a true meritocracy, women and minorities would be succeeding at an equal rate. They'd be promoted at an equal rate. They'd be represented in leadership positions at an equal rate to men. Change also doesn't happen without urgency. And a little bit of this one I borrowed from change management theory. In order to create change, there needs to be urgency. And to make progress, transformational, cultural, and institutional change, we often hear people talking about making these changes, but changes to work-life integration, changes to support working parents, changes to career models, changes to promotion criteria, these are just not being implemented because often there isn't a feeling of urgency. Reality is that diversity often doesn't feel like a burning issue to leadership and managers. Yes, it's good for business, and there's a lot of research out there that says that, but if the business doesn't make these changes today, the business is still going to be there tomorrow. It just isn't urgent enough on their agenda. They don't feel the burning platform. Diversity is also not integrated in business decisions, and this is a significant barrier. Many organizations still view diversity as an initiative or a program that's led or managed by HR or a committee, and the responsibility is then delegated to these groups. Diversity and inclusion is not part of the core business decisions. Finally, leadership. They're still ticking boxes. Leadership are saying all the right things on their websites and in presentations and town halls, and when they are included in awards. But for a lot of them, they're not truly understanding how diversity and the benefits of diversity connects to their business. And the era of checking a box, the era of diversity being a check-the-box initiative owned by HR is over. The CEO must take ownership and drive accountability among leaders at all levels to close the gap between what is said by the organization and the actual impact. So the whole corporate landscape is evolving, and for us to be able to effectively implement diversity solutions, the way we manage diversity also needs to evolve. One of the things that is evolving is the business case. Then, in the past, it used to be diversity is important because the workplace needs to be reflective of society, and it's the right thing to do. Those were the words that you would often see in the business case published by large organizations. And while these topics are still true, there is some changes in terms of the context and the layers of complexity. Many organizations now define themselves as global entities, and this makes religious, gender, generational, and other types of diversity a business reality. And programs to raise awareness of unconscious bias become increasingly popular. A growing body of research also indicates that diverse and inclusive teams outperform their peers. And companies with inclusive talent practices in hiring, promotion, development, leadership, and team management, stats say that they generate up to 30% higher revenue per employee and have greater profitability than their competitors. But without a strong culture of inclusion and flexibility, this kind of team-centric model comprising diverse individuals may not perform well. And this is one of the biggest drivers for the current business case. Often it's one of the hardest ones for managers to embrace and to see the benefit of and to really integrate in their decisions. The next three I'm going to kind of lump together because they all represent an opportunity to differentiate employment brand and client and consumer brand. As career trajectories change, issues with age and life transitions becoming a lot more important. And anecdotal evidence suggests that millions of baby boomers are delaying retirement while millennials are approaching the age where often both spouses are on work and they expect and demand equal treatment. The prospect of long careers means a wider generational span in the workforce. And the efforts to address such issues are gaining ground. For example, there's a retailer, they developed a program called Snowbird. And this is to help older workers transfer to warmer climates to stay with the company. An organization called Michelin, they let senior white-collar workers stretch out their careers to reduce stress later in life. Now, clients and consumers also expect good values from organizations and the brands that they work with. They want to know your eco-credentials, that you treat your employees well. And we see increasingly organizations being scrutinized for when viral videos appear in the press and memorandums are released out on social media. And then the final one is an interesting one that really illustrates how the landscape for diversity and inclusion management is changing, because socio-political influence didn't always infiltrate the workplace, and certainly not to the extent that they do today, with things like Brexit and the US elections and movements like Black Lives Matters and #MeToo also have an impact on how people feel at work. They expect their employees to have a stance, and they expect transparent opportunities to discuss how they feel and how this impacts them. And also other social issues such as the changing roles of men and women at home and the shift in data showing an increase in women as main income earners for households is also creating an impact. In some countries, the issues are even more pressing. So, for example, in Japan, a survey shows that 53% of women between the ages of 24 and 44 would like to work, but they are unable to obtain jobs. And in Japan, despite some progress, the social narrative is that women will not work once they have children, so organizations don't want to make the investment in their careers. But the workplace is evolving. There's two images on the screen here. The one is then, and it shows a whole line of black, old-fashioned Ford cars. Then any color as long as it's black. Now, have it your way, and there's a Starbucks cup with lots of customizable options. And it is very much out with the old, out with consistency, steadiness, and in with a new choice and customization. There's less of career for life and even fixed career paths. Jobs are more complex and sophisticated, and employees have more opportunities to scale the career lattice instead of the old-fashioned career ladder. With the evolution in the workplace and how we regard and talk about diversity and inclusion in the workplace, we also need to evolve the work that we do in our strategies. Many of the old strategies, I think, still hold true, just like that article from Harvard Business Review that I started off with. Some of the answers haven't changed, but what needs to change and continue to evolve is our approach in how we implement our solutions. I'm going to talk about 4 areas that are really old topics, but I want to give you a fresh take on them and share some practical takeaways and examples about how you can evolve your approach. I see a few comments on the chat here about people feeling it's a little bit faint and they can't hear. So, Rob, I'm not sure if there's anything we can do about it. I know in the test we did, it sounded okay.
Yeah, the comments are referring to just a faint background noise of, it sounds like someone's talking in the background. I'm not sure if that's on your end because no other mics are on, but if not, then it's a mysterious person listening to the to the webinar. But hopefully there seems to be some back noise there, and I'm not sure where it's coming from. So hopefully
I'm closed into an office, so this is as quiet as I can get it.
All right, cool. So hopefully we'll power through, and you know, we'll. Hopefully everyone's making out everything that Sasha's saying.
I hope so too. Okay, so moving on. Just trying to get the slides to move. Rob, you might have to assist me there. Thank you. So one of the things that is still important and that hasn't changed is starting with your top leadership. And one of the questions to ask yourself is, does your top leadership really get it? Do they understand the business case? And I don't mean the generic one of diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams. I mean, do they really understand how diversity can benefit the bottom line of the business? And I work in a law firm, and for us, diversity of thought is really important. Our clients pay us to come up with the kind of creative solutions that their own very sophisticated legal teams cannot. So we need to bring something extra to the table, and to do that we need our people to be able to form teams and approach problems from many different angles so that they can come up with something new. Now for your industry, I think it's important for you to think about what is going to get your leadership excited. What is the angle for you? Is it a client or consumer angle maybe? Some examples of where diversity has been important to organizations is, and this is an old story, many of you might have heard this already, ATMs were not always accessible because the team of people who created them had never sat in a wheelchair, never thought about the height of an ATM or the vantage person of a person who was sitting in a wheelchair. And I read a great article last year about the increasing preference for using glass catwalks in building designs. And they look stunning, they let in a lot of light, but it only took one woman to enter a building just before they opened it all up for the penny to drop that a glass catwalk is not really beneficial for a woman trying to navigate it in a skirt. There's another example is the design of seat belts in cars are less safe for women than men because car manufacturers primarily test with male crash test dummies. A tech company realized its, and this is a favorite example of mine, it really illustrates this. So a tech company realized its new system was not rating candidates for software development jobs and other technical posts in a gender-neutral way. So they'd implemented a bit of artificial intelligence technology to help them. And that was because their computer models were trained to vet applicants by observing patterns in resumes submitted to the company over a 10-year period. And most of the applicants came from men, a reflection of the male dominance across the tech industry. And in effect, the system had taught itself that male candidates were preferable, and they found that it was penalizing resumes that included the words women's, as in women's chess club captain, for example. Now, AI is increasingly used by banks, insurers, healthcare companies, and governments, but the AI industry employs an even lower proportion of women than the rest of the tech sector, and there are concerns that there are not enough female voices influencing this machine learning. So to get your leadership on side, they need to be convinced of the business case as it matters to them, and it is important, and as it is important and relevant to their own business objectives. This is also really an opportunity for you as someone in HR to be a strategic partner to your leadership and to demonstrate your deep understanding of your business. You can help coach them on what is the kind of diversity that's important in your context and make it practical for them. I think that you have a really key role to play in creating that burning platform for action and for change to be made. So using technology and data to identify problems and measure progress, technology can be, and data can be, a really powerful tool to help you understand issues and create urgency and to measure your progress. But there is something such as death by data, and I've certainly experienced it. So I advise to proceed with caution and not get mired in producing lots of dashboards that look really beautiful, but nobody really reads them, and they don't really give you meaningful information. So a piece of data that could be really meaningful, for example, is something like gender pay equity data. Now, this is a topic that's receiving mounting public attention, particularly with reference to the Pay Transparency Act in Ontario, and whether that will come to fruition or not, lots of people are talking about this. Now, an organization that maximized this exercise was Salesforce, and I think it was last year or a couple of years ago, Salesforce performed a comprehensive analysis of 17,000 employees and identified a gender pay gap. And the company then spent roughly $3 million to even out the disparity. So they saw an issue and they took this as an opportunity to correct things. Now, in the UK, it's a legal requirement for organizations of over 100 employees to publish their pay gap in an effort to create greater accountability and transparency and to accelerate the closing of the pay gap. In addition to pay gap reporting, I also personally, within my work, I do performance gap reporting, and I also look at promotion data. And this data really gives me an insight in how decisions are made and how they impact different groups of people. And it gives me the field to challenge the way we do things and to create urgency, to change processes, and to motivate people to challenge themselves and where bias might be creeping into our processes. So moving beyond HR, so diversity really needs to be a business responsibility. It's not solely an HR responsibility. It must be practiced by everyone, for organizations to make progress, and it needs to be owned by all line leaders. And yes, the programs that we create are very important, and I don't want you to be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Your mentoring program, your sponsorship program, your women's leadership program, your flexible working, your blind CV and application screening, they are all important and they play an important role. But an important step is integrating diversity and inclusion in the business and making it a business objective. So how can you encourage ownership of diversity and inclusion outcomes and initiatives? Some organizations are progressive here, and they have made diversity part of their performance evaluation process, and lack of progress impact compensation decisions. So you have a little bit of carrot and a little bit of stick there. You're not quite there yet. What else can you do? Sometimes the baby bird needs to be nudged out of the nest to teach them how to fly, and I'm referring to your business leader. They won't take things forward on their own if you keep on doing things for them. When someone's beliefs and behaviors are out of sync, that person experiences what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Experiments show that people have a strong tendency to try and correct dissonance by either changing the belief or the behavior. So how does this apply here? So if you prompt them to act in ways that support a particular view, they are more likely to shift their opinion to that view. So when managers actively help boost diversity in their companies, something similar can happen. They begin to think of themselves as diversity champions. To give an example, give your leaders and managers a specific task or project to lead or sponsor when it comes to diversity. Ask them to do things like introductory remarks at diversity events and write those remarks for them so that they are on message. And just continue to create opportunities for your leaders to be front and center of leading diversity communications and delivering messages and talking about diversity and inclusive culture. And I want to talk about training also. In the past, we've often gone to training as a solution. And I mentioned training a few times already. Let's bring, we do things like, let's bring someone in to tell us what we shouldn't do. Let's bring someone in to talk about unconscious bias or cultural competency or generational diversity or sexual harassment or any number of topics related to this area. But the thing is, people often respond to compulsory courses with anger and resistance. And many participants actually report more animosity towards other groups afterwards. There's a quote up on the screen here that says, if diversity management is strategic to the organization, diversity training must be mandatory, and management has to make it clear that if you can't deal with that, then we have to ask you to leave. And that was a quote by the late diversity guru, R. Roosevelt Thomas Jr. And I think that pretty much illustrates another evolution in diversity management. And we need to consider throwing out the rule book when it comes to training. So I collected a few articles, and I'll just read the headlines here. Why diversity programs fail. To improve diversity, don't make people go to diversity training. Really? How diversity training infuriates men and fails women. And colorblind diversity efforts don't work. And I pulled these articles from Harvard Business Review, The Washington Post, Psychology Today, and Time. And they really all say the same thing. Training does not result in progress when it comes to either diversity or inclusion. Well, after that very controversial statement, let me take a step back. I am not saying that training isn't important, because it really is. It plays a vital role in education and awareness of the issue. But the old rules don't apply anymore. So how do you make training stick? How do you ensure that it leads to the changes in behavior that will lead to the transformational, cultural, and institutional change that we need in our organizations? Training should never be a standalone and one-off solution. It really needs to be linked to organizational process, and it needs to link to an accountability structure. So for example, like many of you, we do unconscious bias training as it relates to recruitment. And we do all the role plays and the scenarios of how bias can play out in the selection process, but we don't stop there. We also ask everybody who comes to the training to sign up to a little pledge that they have to commit to. And it's pretty simple. It basically says that you will treat everyone fairly and objectively and not make assumptions about them. And we put this little statement on all the interviewer iPads and again on all the feedback forms as a reminder. But we don't stop there either. So to audit the process, we measure the demographic of the application pool. And again, we look at that diversity demographic data at the first round interview, the final round interview, and again at the offer and offer acceptance stages. And the idea is here that we maintain the ratios of the demographic groups represented throughout that process. Then to be transparent, the results are presented back to the interviewers to create accountability so that they have accountability for the decisions they make in the process, and for them to see that if we don't maintain ratios, that they really need to challenge themselves and each other on their biases and how they're making decisions about people. Another example is I have a similar process for our partner promotion process. In addition to the training that we provide on gender bias and how it can creep into our process, The first round of the applications we do it on a gender blind basis. So our promotions committee assess all those applications without knowing the gender or the identity of those applications, and then they score those applications. We then compare those scores with the final decisions at the end of the process and present that back to the decision makers. And it helps to reveal any bias in the process, and for this group to really tighten up their decision making, for them to see what they have learned in the training, for them to see it in action, and for them to embed and integrate that learning into how they make decisions about people. So what we're trying to do is to integrate diversity and inclusion into the decision-making process by being transparent in how we do this with data, and to create accountability and checks and balances for people. So when you run training, consider how you link it to processes and where decisions are made about people, and how you can create accountability structure around that. There are other tools available also to help you with this, and I'm sure you use some of the technologies already, things like Success Factors, HireView, Entelo. They're recruitment systems, and they can help with manager hiring practices, including job descriptions and interviewer scoring patterns that can help to identify racial and cultural bias. Now, there are other ways to reinvent training also, and the slide up here has an image of two people trying to talk to each other through a telephone, and I say that in quotation marks, with two cans and a piece of string. So training doesn't have to be a speaker in front of a room. Research shows that people are more likely to retain information if they are immersed in an experience. So embrace experiential learning. It is certainly more memorable and effective for the participants. It's also really engaging, and it can be a lot of fun, and people are more likely to engage in this content if they're having fun. So I'm a big advocate for getting people talking, and the more people talk about things, the more normal conversations feel about differences and diversity and behaviors. Now, there's an organization called HCA, and they had an initiative that they called Brave Conversations. And basically what it was a forum that invited employees to share perspectives and to discuss complex and challenging topics. I think this is really a great way, and you can really immerse people in topics like bias and privilege. Last year, I did a series of events across some of our offices where we did a privilege walk. And for those of you that don't know what a privilege walk is, you can certainly go and have a look on YouTube, and you type it in, privilege walk. There'll be hundreds of examples. But basically, everybody who attends the event, you line them up in a line at one side of the room, and then you read out a number of statements that pertain to everyday situations that could imply privilege or lack of privilege, and they either have to take a step forward or stay where they are, or in some cases take a step backwards. And the idea is at the end of the room, the end of the day, or the exercise, people are spread out across the room as an illustration of the difference of privileges for that group of people. It's going to be quite a sensitive exercise to run, so we did a debrief conversation at the end of each of these sessions, and I found I was really rewarded with openness and candid comments that really brought people of all different levels within the organization together, all different levels of seniority, different backgrounds, and a really new level of understanding. Another activity is reverse mentoring. It's a great way to get conversation going. And reverse mentoring is when you, for example, pair up a millennial with your baby boomer CEO, and the millennial is able to offer a new perspective to your CEO, whose inner circle is likely most often other baby boomers. And L'Oreal's CEO, for example, does this. He goes makeup shopping with his millennial female reverse mentor, and it gives him an insight into a key client demographic and behaviors associated with that demographic. So there's a really big role also still for affinity groups and employee resource groups to play here. Every now and then I'll catch an article about these groups and people saying they've had their day, they no longer serve a purpose. But I think they play a really essential and valuable role in creating opportunities for dialogue and keeping issues on the table. And I get my employee resource groups to host simple networking sessions. These are super low cost, very easy to facilitate. And I get them just to prepare a list of what I call elephant in the room topics. And these are basically the things that people don't want to talk about out aloud. We get inspiration from the media, from books, someone's experience, and then people just talk in small groups about these topics. They share experiences and opinions and advice, and people have the opportunity to feel heard and to connect with their colleagues and to normalize speaking about these things also. One of my best received initiatives in the last year has actually been a diversity book club. So we read a book with a diversity theme, and then people get to talk about it. And people just love the opportunity to talk and to share their opinions and to learn more about their colleagues, and to share the experience of having read an interesting book together. There's so many ways for creating learning and awareness on diversity and inclusion in non-traditional ways that you can use to supplement your formal training. And I would just really like to encourage you just to have some fun with it. So in closing, I'll share with you something that an academic shared with me a few years ago. She said to me that diversity can be described as a wicked problem, and I believe that's a technical academic term, a wicked problem, and wicked problems have no simple solutions. So there are no direct simple solutions to making our organizations more diverse and inclusive. But evolving our approach and trying lots of different things is really important, because we have to try lots of different things. And if they don't work and we see they don't work, then let's move on. Let's try something else. Let's keep it fun, and let's try and keep it relevant to our organizations. Now, I see lots of people have been typing lots of things in the chat here, and I haven't had a chance to read them. Rob, maybe if you've had a chance to read them, you can tell me if there are any burning questions to be answered.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of questions coming about. So we'll dive into those questions right now. What I want to do is make sure we focus on those questions. So I'll give you a second to review those as I kind of wrap up the end of the webinar, and then we'll dive into all those questions. Appreciate everyone's passion and excitement for asking those. So just a couple of last things before getting into that, into the questions. Just understanding the slides and recordings will be sent to you via email when posted. And if you don't get that email or looking for it, if you go to the same page as you signed up, you'll be able to get all that information there. And just as a note, while you're there, take a look at some of the WorkTango resources. There's a number of things, whether it's different articles, events, and other guides that are there to help you. And obviously, we're very thankful that everyone joined us today. And we're actually having a webinar next month more about the evolution of employee voice. So once you're on that site, take a look at that and feel free to register as well. But I bought you enough time, Sasha, to take a look at some of those questions. but
I'm still reading through them. Rob, I don't know if you want to pick one that you want to answer.
Yeah, well, I was kind of keeping track with people who asked some early ones, so I think we should let those folks go first. But the first comment and question that came in was that many level-headed leaders say, "I'll choose the right person for the job, not based on the color of their skin or their gender," when they either hire or promote employees. And what's the best response to this when promoting diversity and inclusion? And what specific statistics would you state to overcome this belief?
I think that this is something that we often hear. We choose the best person for the job. We look at who's performed the best in the interview. But when you dig a little bit deeper, the person who is the so-called best person for the job is the one that got along the best with the interviewers. I think that to kind of correct that situation, it's important to pay attention to the process. So have you done your analysis before you posted the role to understand, okay, we have a vacancy in the team. What are the current skills gaps within that team that we need to recruit for? What are the things that we need that the team currently don't have that would be great for this new person to have? And then to have a really defined process so that the people that you are meeting are compared against the same criteria in a fair way, and that everybody has an equal opportunity. I think it's also important to pay attention to feedback. after meeting candidates and asking interviewers what they mean by that comment. Okay, why did you like him? What did you see about this candidate that makes you feel that they would do well in this role? Or what was it about that candidate that didn't give you a good feeling? Can you be more specific about it? So asking these gentle but challenging questions can help coach your interviewers and decision makers into making more robust decisions and challenging their own bias.
Okay. So there's a second part to that question, which was actually asked a couple of other times about, any of the specific statistics to state that belief or that identify that statistics that having this diverse and inclusive culture have an impact in the organization. I won't ask you to cite those that are top of mind, but what I think might be helpful is, getting that information from you after we can add to the follow-up notes or to the link there.
And there's lots of great reports out there. Deloitte is a really good source of information. The Center for Talent Innovation have a lot of incredible reports. PwC have a number of great reports. Also, McKinsey do a great report on women, which is an excellent source of information. And subscribing to publications like Harvard Business Review, you always get access to excellent data and research studies.
Wonderful. It's not common you see someone kind of like or +1 someone's question, but I just saw that on the chat there, so I thought it caught my eye. But the question was what are some ways you have engaged the dominant groups, or for example, white males who are not really interested in D&I and wanted to just kind of seemed like a couple people had +1 that. So any thoughts on that, Sasha?
Yeah, I think that lots of organizations are trying to solve this one, including me at my own organization. I have certainly not solved that one yet, but some of the ways that I've tried to do things is looking at generational diversity. So, often with our boomers, they have aging parents. So focusing things on how do we create flexibility for our older employees who have aging parents and they don't have the same drivers for wanting flexible working as millennials. So engaging some of our senior men and older men into the conversation that way has been useful for us. Another interesting way to focus on diversity has been looking at working parents as a whole. So not just looking at maternity leave, but how do we support the dads in our workplace, and how have the expectations on fathers changed from a societal perspective and also from a career perspective. So creating some interventions and opportunities for the men to talk also can be an interesting complement to your diversity work. And I think that there are organizations who offer more interesting programs also about how to create men into champions. There is an Australian program called Male CEO Champions for Change, and there's also a program from Catalyst called MARC, Men Engage. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's MARC. So there are formalized programs that you can explore to engage men also.
Great. A lot of questions here, so we'll try to plug through it in the next 9 minutes. One question was about asking your familiarity, Sasha, with the Government of Canada's Gender-Based Analysis Plus training, and any opinions if you're familiar with it.
I'm not familiar with that one, actually, so I can't comment on that one.
Okay. So I guess staying on that same training route, a lot of questions about that. And one question came in, asked, what are the best tactical practices during talent assessment? So how do we check ourselves during this process for a D&I progress without hyper-focusing on every individual's gender, ethnicity as part of that talent review and successor planning? So, are you creating unintentional bias during these discussions? And that's kind of the question around what are the best tactical practices during that talent assessment?
Yeah, I think that there's no quick fix for this. This is something that you build on over time as you develop the experience and skill of your interviewers. So for example, in our student recruitment process, we started off with some training for people. We've done the training on an annual basis, so people come back for a refresher every year. we ask people to commit to a statement about not making assumptions about people and not stereotyping people, and to treat them as individuals. We do a number of diversity events with students, so we prep everybody ahead of those sessions again to ensure that they understand our philosophy, they understand what the firm's offering is, they understand some of the challenges that students from different backgrounds experience. So gradually we're building up their skill and their comfort and their ability to answer questions from the students. After the interview process, I've already mentioned that we provide our interviewers with data on the demographics and the ratios at each stage of the process. And this has been a really excellent opportunity for us to have some really deep and meaningful discussions with our interviewers about how they're making decisions and how they need to catch themselves. We've also talked about in law firms, there's often a social element within the recruitment process. So we do some dinners for the students at the end of the process. And this is a huge opportunity for bias to creep in. If you don't drink, for example, or you are not a super chatty person who's comfortable in these large group environments, then that kind of setting could be a disadvantage for you. So we've talked to our interviewers about how they could spot students who are feeling left out, who are not engaged by people in conversation, how they could, for the quieter people, have more one-on-one conversations with them and not just focus on large group conversations. So I think there's lots of little things that you need to do, and it's over time that you build the skill of your group.
Wonderful, thank you. Before I ask the next question, there was a question about asking any recommendations for companies or softwares to integrate into Taleo for blind resumes. So I put that in the chat. So if anyone could help out, Diane that asked that question, that'd be helpful. And while we try and get through many questions, which is it's great to see everyone engaged. Maybe a quick, easy one for you, Sasha. Question was, do you have any book recommendations for a diversity book club that you mentioned?
So actually the book that we are going to be reviewing in a couple of weeks' time is Educated. I don't know if anybody has heard about that one. It is definitely one of my favorite books to read. But when we launched the book club, we wanted to pick something easy and very engaging for people, and we picked a book called A Day in the Life of Marlon Bundone, and some people may have heard about it. It was a spoof book that was created by John Oliver. And it's a 40-page book that's illustrated about a gay bunny who lives in the White House and his experiences of finding love and how all the other animals treated them and supported them. And there's an interesting character in there called the stink bug. So even though it was a short book and it was a pretty easy book to read, people really loved the conversation that it generated, and we had quite an in-depth, high-level conversation about underlying themes or themes that maybe children wouldn't have picked up on the book. So you could really take any book and just shape some interesting questions around that to generate discussion and get people thinking.
All right, great. I wrote that one down. I saw another plus one here on a question asked a little earlier, and the question asked, my recent experience on the required training was interpreted as highly political and anti-white. And the question is, and that's with words and materials, etc. But can you speak to this around how, I'm not sure if the question is, can you speak to this about how you recommend combating it, or have you experienced it before?
I think that the worst possible outcome of a training session is when people feel defensive, that they feel that they are at fault, and that they are being accused of something. And I think that it's a skilled trainer could take a very sensitive topic and frame it for people to make it feel relatable, and for them not to feel defensive about it, but for them to gently explore their role and what they need to do to improve how they think about inclusion and the actions that they take to support inclusion. I think for a lot of people, they feel that the concept of unconscious bias and having unconscious bias is bad. So if you have bias, it equals to you being a bad person. And that's not the case at all. Unconscious bias is something that each of us have, and it's important and necessary to how we live our lives and how we make decisions. So training really needs to explore that with people in a gentle way so that they don't feel accused. I recently wrote an article on privilege for a magazine for a professional association, and it was a really tough article to write because any conversation that you have with privilege often is met with defensiveness. And I think that it's important to, if you are looking for a trainer, to find someone that is really skilled in exploring these topics in a gentle way, because you do not want to alienate people. You want to bring them along with you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sasha. I looking at the time, I know we're not going to get to all the questions, and I apologize. So we'll do what we can in the next couple of minutes, and loving the people wanting to participate. The question that kind of came after that one was, we've talked a lot about minorities and women. What about LGBTQ and persons with disabilities? So I don't know if you want to add any comments or context to that, Sasha.
Totally, yes. And a lot of my examples have been about gender and minorities, but that doesn't mean that other areas of diversity isn't equally as important. And I think that when it comes to LGBT inclusion over the last decade, organizations have really played a very important role in challenging the social narrative and advancing LGBT inclusion, not just within their organizations, but outside of the world of work and the social sphere also. And I've seen many organizations have very successful initiatives supporting LGBT people and bringing really interesting topics into the workplace. I've organized a session actually coming up in the next few months about having conversations with children on LGBT and gender identity. And I'm really excited for that session, because a lot of our people have come to me and said, do we have access to resources, because my child has someone in their class who is gender non-conforming, or my child is friends with someone who has two dads, and I don't know how to have that conversation. So I think there's lots of organizations are doing, and I'm sorry that I didn't get around to sharing more examples about that.
All right. So rounding it at two, I'll try and squeeze in one last one, and a lot of good concepts around diversity and inclusion and different types of it. One more, I guess, specific or tactical question, Sasha, was loving the elephant in the room idea. How do you facilitate it? Ground rules? Like, has it ever gone off the rails?
It's never gone off the rails for me yet, but I always go into those sessions knowing that it could, and that there's a little bit of a risk there. I think that careful preparation is important. Picking the topics is often the easy bit. People will say, I really want to talk about Me Too, or I really want to talk about the fact that women aren't being allocated career-changing work, or I really want to talk about the fact that everybody's always socializing around alcohol. And so coming up with the topics are pretty easy. I think then what we like to do is we bring a small group of people together and we kind of flesh out some questions around that. So how do we dig into that topic? How do we ease people into it? What do we want them to probe on? We also, when we assign people into the smaller groups, we put a facilitator on each group to help move the conversation along and to diffuse any tension if there is. And to be honest, the role of the facilitators has been pretty minimal to date. People have been great in these conversations, and people have been very understanding. We also, when we start with the session, we talk a little bit about it's okay for people to have different opinions, and people will have different opinions. And your job in this group is to hear other people's opinions, and you may take something from it, you may take nothing from it, but to understand that it's their opinion, and your job is not necessarily there. You're not necessarily there to change their mind.
Wonderful. All right. So we did not get to all the questions here, and definitely apologize for that. We've taken a little more than Sasha's time than initially, was the plan. So I think we'll end the questions there. I think we'll look at, as a WorkTango team, is there any way to collect this information and insight or questions, or even some of the ideas and thoughts that were given through the chat, and then bring that to life in some way in the follow-up. But I do want to thank you, Sasha, for your time, your insights, a lens into what a global diversity and inclusion leader does, and a lot to think about and reflect on, personally for myself, and I'm sure for a lot of people, as I see some chats coming in, thanking you for your time. So thanks again, and thanks everyone for attending and participating, and looking forward to the next one. Have a really good rest of the day, everyone, and take care.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.